And now he's just gone.
Okay,
so, why don't we go ahead and start having a conversation? Hey, Adam, I'm just going to hold you right next to my microphone.
All right, well, I'm going to restart my computer. Because the one time this happened in a Hangout before, that's what it took to get the microphone to work again. And I don't know why that happened.
All right.
So hello, everybody. I apologize for all the technical issues with this. It works wonderfully when we do the practices.
Yeah, of course.
So who do we have here?
So my name's Vidya. I'm a fourth year from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston.
I'm Mitchell Feigley.
The only problem with this plan, Mike, is that I can't hear anybody until I log back in.
We're going to fix that right now. Let's try again. So that we have with us Vidya Warren. She's a fourth-year student from Baylor in Houston.
And I'm Mitchell Feigley. I'm a fourth-year medical student from LSU in New Orleans.
I'm Mike Jacob, a second-year resident from Yale.
And hi, I'm Rachael Freeze-Ramsey. I'm the APD at the University of Arkansas.
I think silently with us also is Andy Bunch, who's a fourth-year student from the University of Virginia.
This is great. I appreciate all of you guys being here and trying to bear with us through the technology issues. This is sort of a particularly stressful time, and I imagine you're hoping to get some good advice and not learn how badly Google Hangouts is. So, if anybody has any specific questions, you know, there's certainly some things that are always really topical. If anybody has specific questions, I would be happy to answer them to get started.
Could you talk a little bit about what is going on with this October 16th date? Because I feel like it's something I hadn't heard about before, and then it became a thing this year, and I didn't really know what it was.
So I believe the way you're talking about is the county EM group, which is sort of a subgroup within CORD of all sort of CORD is the Council of Residency Directors in Emergency Medicine. And there's sort of a subgroup of all the county program directors who sort of feel like they have similar needs and similar issues that they face. And so they have their own kind of support group, and they decided that they wanted to do a date where they were going to all work together, because it was a small enough group, where they were going to all work together and release all of their interview days all at the same time. And it sort of kicked off they kind of let everybody know about this, and then a lot of programs came out and said, you know what, we can do the same thing. And so a lot of programs, I think it was the 14th or 16th, I think is what you said. I thought it was today, but maybe it is Friday. A lot of programs said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and be part of that as well. So that quite a few other programs said, you know, our interview days start so early that we can't wait till the 14th or the 16th. We really need to do a later date or an earlier date to start offering. So I think many programs have been sending out invites as early as the very end of September or early October. But there was definitely a big bolus of interviews coming, as maybe half the programs in the country, I would estimate, are going to be part of sort of this big mass release date.
And
I'm going to try and rejoin the video chat, and we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, that's certainly new since I went through the process a couple of years ago.
Yeah, something that just came up this year, and we don't really know what's going to happen, but they decided there was enough people to just try it.
Silent, and I'll put him back on the phone again. Rachel, did you have any other kind of thoughts regarding that topic?
Sure. So I would just add to that that, you know, I do think that it is affecting our timeline a little bit. You know, before I knew that there was this push towards later invites, we kind of had a plan with my students as far as, you know, when they should start expecting invites, when they should get concerned and add, you know, more programs. And this has kind of pushed that timeline back a little bit. So I have a lot of students that are worried. They feel like they should have more invites at this time. And so I'm just really having to tell them, you know, just relax. It's okay. You've got time. Don't freak out. So I do feel like it's pushed the timeline back a bit. And even, you know, our program, although we have our first interview day tomorrow, we couldn't push it back. But it definitely made us feel like we didn't have to rush as much. So even programs that are not doing the October 16th invite, I feel like maybe they did give themselves a little more time. So I think it's definitely kind of pushing some of the time frame back.
So would you recommend then to students to kind of hold off on accepting all the interviews they're getting now and wait until October 16th? Or I guess it's kind of difficult to figure out where you're going and to plan your interviews if you don't know when the rest of them will be. Oh, wait, you just got frozen. Hold on, or muted.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I think, you know, what a lot of students will do is go ahead and accept the invites as they get them, because it's okay to cancel invites. You know, right now, one thing that I would recommend that you should be doing is really be looking at programs and kind of deciding, you know, the ones that you've applied to, which ones are kind of your top picks and which one are kind of at the lower end of your list. And that way, as the invites come in, if some of your schools that you're more interested in invite you, you can always take off and cancel those invites that are at the lower end, as long as you give them plenty of notice. But I think it's okay. I mean, it's okay to cancel invites. I think, you know, now go ahead and accept them. But as other ones start rolling in, it's okay to cancel them. We've got plenty of people that we can take off the wait list as long as you cancel early. I don't know what Adam tells his students, maybe.
Now they can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I have to speak through you, Mike. So I give all my students the same advice that you were just giving. So when you make that list of where you're going to apply, go ahead and also make a sort of a hierarchy within that list, sort of a second list of what are your top programs, and then that way you know when you get one that you're more interested in, it's time to let another one go and keep that number around, you know, 12 or so active interviews that you have lined up. But it is totally fine to accept invites and to let them go. Nobody takes it personally. No one has hard feelings. We've all got hundreds of applicants that we have not invited for interviews yet, who we would, you know, probably be happy to see come in. And so, you know, there's no hard feelings if you've got another place that you would rather go. And the earlier you let that go, the better it is sort of for everybody.
And whenever you talking about like letting them go, is there like, should you, I guess, follow that up with like an email to them just to say you're letting them? I mean, like how would you like recommend that conversation? I guess between when you email them.
I mean, if you're using Interview Broker, you can just release I believe you can just release the interview right back, or you can politely, say, I appreciate the opportunity, and, but I'm going to go ahead and have to schedule something else. They're not going to re-invite you at that point. Don't let one go if you think you might actually want to go there.
All right.
It's really for when you say, okay, this is number 20 on my list. I'm really not going to want to interview there. Now I've got 10 higher up on my own personal list, and then it's okay to let it go.
So for the interview broker, it's fine to just kind of release it and not send anything else. They're okay with that, I guess.
Yeah, your relationship with them is done.
Okay, so I just didn't know if I should follow that up with something.
When you're in good shape.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And everybody cancels interviews. Every program gets lots of cancellations. Nobody takes it personally. We're not going to hunt you down or anything.
That's good to know, at least. That it happens a lot, I guess, and it's not like frowned upon or anything.
Programs would actually much prefer if people canceled earlier. The sooner you cancel on the interview, you're not really going to go on. The sooner we can set someone else up, they can make their travel plans. One of the things that sort of needs to be worked on in the future is trying to make this whole process smoother.
And so that's in token about Kellogg. I know at this stage in the game, there are some students who are kind of overwhelmed with the number of invitations they've gotten, and probably just as many, if not more, students are concerned that they haven't received, their quote-unquote magic number of 12. But I know everyone's a little bit more interested in that number than I think is really kind of reasonable. But that being said, what thoughts would you have for a student who, at this point in the game, it's mid-October, has gotten maybe 3 invitations, and I think that links back to what you're speaking to about canceling interviews as well.
Yeah, there's a big bolus of interviews coming. As soon as the rest of those programs have been holding off, send out all of their interviews in the next few days. Usually I tell people not to start worrying until you get to late October, very early November, if they feel like they don't have the numbers. But there really is a haves and have-not situation. Almost all the interviews are in the hands of a small 10 or 15% of the applicant pool who have got lots and lots of interviews and can't make up their mind with what to do with all of them. And then the majority of people, us regular folks, have 1 or 2 or 3 interviews, and they're just hoping for other interviews to show up. And what's happened every year in the past is those folks all get interviewed, except a little bit later. If they're a competitive applicant, an average applicant, there's going to be some folks who may struggle a little bit more to get interviews, but this is not time to panic yet. Rachel, what do you think? Anything to add to that?
I missed a little bit of what you were saying, but absolutely. Interviews come out on a kind of a rolling basis, and so it's really those top tier, AOA people. They're getting a lot of invites right now, and then as they cancel and as that kind of second round of invites goes out, the majority of the students who are, good students who will be good residents. That's when a lot of them are going to start getting their invites. So, the people that I would be worried about at this point, we're already worried about people that have red flags and that, they've had some academic difficulties in the past. And at this point, those people should really have already met with their advisors and, had kind of a backup plan. So at this point, I would not be, advising most students to start coming up with a backup plan or anything like that. There's still time, and anybody that I'm worried about, we've already had that conversation at this point. But these invites are going to come out on a rolling basis, and there's people that they'll start off with a couple and they'll get worried, and by the end of interview season they'll have had that 12 to 15 interviews, way more than they thought they were going to get. So yeah, it just it happens over time.
Yeah, Brad.
I think that's really good advice. That you're sort of at this point, your application's out there. It's probably been reviewed as much as it's going to be reviewed right now. The interview offers that you have, that's not all you're going to have, but your plan is sort of set in motion. It's too early to try and do something else. It's too early to try and make a whole bunch of phone calls. Like panic phone calls to residency programs right now aren't going to get you anywhere. In a couple more weeks, it may start to be time to let people know, because it is important to think about what to do if you feel like you haven't gotten those interviews. It's hard to wait until late November, waiting for these magical waitlist interviews that are supposed to be coming, that probably are coming, because there are quite a few spots out there. But it's hard to sort of to wait. And the things that you can do is you can sort of rearrange your schedule. If you get to November 1st and you don't feel like you've got very many interviews, you're probably still going to have the opportunity to complete more interviews, but it's going to be in late December. It's going to be in January, trying to get your January clear so that you can travel all over the place. Because what happens is people hold on, and then they don't really let them go until we get
till we get into December, and they start letting their January interviews go. And when they let those go, then it starts to everything starts to be sort of a trickle down of interviews out to everybody. And so you can rearranging your
schedule, and you find out that maybe you didn't get the 12 interviews by October 30th that you were hoping for, is one thing you can do. Some polite calls into programs or polite emails, especially if you have additional information to provide.
Like you did a late rotation, and maybe there was a slow that's been uploaded late that wasn't there in early October when people were when everyone was doing their application reviews. Or sometimes it's just if you have a local connection to somewhere that may not have come across in your application, that's a good thing to call. It doesn't always show up. There may be a place you're very interested in, but your application doesn't show. And when programs are looking at 1,000 applicants for 120 interview spots, a lot of the time it can come down to a decision between this person has a connection to this area and this person doesn't.
So it looks like Andy had a question about couples matching. He's asking, if one partner has gotten an interview to an institution but the other has not yet, is it okay for the uninvited partner to contact their program and express their interest and mention the fact that their partner is interviewing at that location?
Yes. I would say yes. I think it's a very reasonable thing to do. Usually places are going to interview couples together. If they don't, it's easy for it to slip through and not realize that. The exception might be if it's in a area where there are lots and lots of programs and they feel like the other person may get interviews locally and sort of leave them to their own devices. But in general, it's not an unreasonable phone call to make. Just to check in, because there's a lot of applicants and it's easy to make a clerical error. But most places that really look at couples will usually have them come in on the same interview day, sort of extend that courtesy.
That's a great tip. So I know I also had, when I was on the trail, a lot of friends who were targeting kind of particular geographies, and let's say you're up near the Boston area, Adam, and
yeah.
And I knew friends who had would have an interview, let's say at Mass General, and really were interested in staying in that area. would you say that it's reasonable for students as well to kind of reach out to other programs in the area and say, hey, I'm swinging through?
That's actually, no one would be offended by that. It's probably not going to get you an interview unless you were already sitting in a, sitting on the top of their stack of people that they're going to invite. It's probably not going to, convince them to give you an interview. But it's certainly worth a try. And it may be that you were sitting in the next wave of people they're going to invite, and it can make them change something. I don't think there's any harm in doing that if you're going to be in the area. Everybody appreciates how expensive all of this is and how expensive the travel is. I have no idea if anybody can hear me. Do I still need microphone?
No, I think we're hearing you pretty great.
Yeah, we're hearing you fine.
I'm going to try and hang up on you, Mike. This went bad last time.
It seems to be working well now. So another question I have the opportunity to work with a lot of med students, as you know, and as do all of you. And there's a common questions about kind of the importance of board scores, the USMLE scores particularly, or COMLEX for those students who are in the osteopathic kind of world. But a particular question is, if a student doesn't score well in Step 2 CK, and they intend to retake the exam, is it acceptable to not release the scores until they have the new score, or should they release kind of the fail score at that point? And is it worth notifying programs that you intend to retake?
So you're talking about failing Step 2. Not
right.
Just sort of doing poorly, but to actually fail and getting less than a 209 on Step 2.
Right, to whatever the score is now. That's.
I believe it's a 209. I've looked at it. I think it's a 209 for this most recent administration of the test. Unfortunately, if you fail Step 2, you're probably not getting a lot of interviews, and it's going to be a hard thing to hide anyways. Like that's the kind of thing that ends up putting someone into the SOAP having to scramble for a position. There's not a lot of programs that get excited to interview somebody with a failed Step 2. Unfortunately, if you retake it and do really well on the second time and have an explanation for it, if you have enough time to turn that around and then release that, but we're getting late enough that everybody should have board scores in their applications now, and if you don't, your application's incomplete and people probably aren't really reviewing it.
How about for
Rachel, do you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
Sure, yeah, I was. I think failures of Step 1, people are more likely to overlook. Failures of Step 2, that's going to be a big problem. If you look at the NRMP 2014 Residency Director survey that they did, a large proportion of schools will not even interview someone who's failed Step 2. And what you guys may not realize is on ARIS, you can set automatic filters, and so applicants can be filtered out. A lot of probably have that filter in, just to filter those applicants out. There may be some schools, that are willing to interview someone who failed Step 2, but it's going to be a small number. And when someone has not released their board scores on ARIS, I know that there's a reason for that. And usually at that point, we're looking through the dean's letter, we're looking through the SLOs, trying to see, what happened and why they haven't released them. But,
Or quite honestly, you're not looking at them at all. If they haven't released their scores, they're sitting in the incomplete pile, not being reviewed. So if your option is to not release your scores at all, at this point your application is not going to get looked at until you release those scores, and that Step 2 fail is going to be in there no matter what. If you do have somebody who's genuinely failed, I'm not sure either option, waiting or releasing them, I'm not sure either option is going to help. That's going to get out at some point, and the best thing that you can probably do is clearly make sure you retake and pass Step 2, because you need to pass it to even move on to residency. But you also need to start making some backup plans and start figuring out what you're going to do, because you're probably going to have to prove yourself clinically in another specialty for a year to get into EM, unless you get kind of pretty lucky.
So building off of that, how about for people who didn't fail but maybe didn't do as well as they did on step 1? Would you recommend just going ahead and releasing their step 2 anyway, or hold on to it until maybe closer to match day or rank day when they've met you and love you already, and then you can say, oh, by the way, the score maybe wasn't as good as I wanted it to be?
There are some programs, I believe, that don't really look at an applicant, like will not make a rank decision until that step 2 score is released. And I think you're probably better off releasing it, and you may get asked about it. There are some years when for some folks where for whatever reason their step 2 score goes down, almost everybody goes up from step 1 to step 2. Just the way the test is, I think the cutoff is about 10 points higher, maybe even a little more than that. For what's passing, so most people go up. But if you do go down, it's certainly not the end of the world, especially if you're going down from like if you did really well on step 1, and sometimes it's not a big deal to go down. Certainly, you always prefer to see somebody go up every time they take a test, but you can't really hide it like past rank day. There are a lot of programs will not put you on the rank list without a step 2 score, even if they didn't have it when you did the initial application. And then you're going to come through an interview, and they're going to be looking for it. I think, in general, you're better off getting in front of things than hiding things. If there's something you think is hurting your application, then you want to make that part of your personal statement and sort of get in front of this and explain, the circumstances around what happened. I'm not sure that just doing a little bit worse would qualify as that. It's not like going to prison. Unfortunately, a lot of anxiety surrounds the step scores, and even though almost everybody who sort of is an educator in emergency medicine doesn't really believe it predicts much other than that you're going to have an easier or harder time with standardized tests in the future, and doesn't really predict how good of a doctor you're going to be. So even though it's used a lot in the screening process, it's used because it's what we have. We've got this piece of data, so we use it to screen. But very few people are going to look at it and say, like, oh, I don't think that he or she is going to be any good at this because they don't have they didn't have amazing well above average board scores. Really, I think a lot of places. I mean, there are certainly some people who really like board scores, just like there's some people who really like personal statements. But most people, it's what people had to say about you in your letters of recommendation, specifically your EM slows from program leadership, from people who write lots of slows. That's really determining the strength of your application, more so than anything else. I read good letters about someone who worked really hard and showed improvement and can learn, and I just want to look past the mediocre or poor board scores. That doesn't scare me off at all. Other questions folks have?
I can ask a question. So as you're preparing to go on interviews, is there, some people have said, you can call the residency coordinator and ask in advance who's going to be interviewing you, and then go from there and maybe plan questions to ask that are specific. Is that something that's maybe acceptable to do, to call in advance and ask who your interviewers are going to be, or should you kind of just wait and see how it goes on the day of?
I think I would love to hear Mike's opinion on this one too, Megan's opinion on this one too. I'm more of a fan of winging it. It's probably not unreasonable to know like who the program director and maybe associate, but especially the program director. That's who makes the real decisions. APDs, you don't need to know APDs. But if there's somebody you already know already, but I think that having specific questions is okay, but having questions is what's really important. I often gauge how much I think someone's really interested in our program based upon whether they have like real questions or not, things they really want to know. Because a big part of the interview day, I think, is on my side is educating the applicant on what what they're getting themselves into, what the program's going to be like, and trying to make sure they make an informed decision about us. And so I like it when people have have questions. So I think having questions is great. I don't know if they need to be like it might creep me out if you start asking me questions about my daughters. About my Facebook statuses and things like that. Maybe too far, but it's hard to say. I'm sure there are people out there who would find it flattering that you sort of had pre-read their CV. But most people in emergency medicine are probably pretty comfortable with a casual conversation. Mike, were you a Facebook stalker pre-interview?
I certainly wasn't a Facebook stalker. I'm a second year. I didn't do any kind of asking in advance who would be interviewing, but you can kind of predict who the people are going to be. You're going to interview with program directors, assistant program directors, other residency leadership. If the program has a alternate clinical site, it's really likely that you're going to have some leadership from that site. And you can kind of predict that. And for me, it was important to research the program and understand kind of what they were about. All of the programs are really well regulated and are going to meet very similar base requirements. And it's really about kind of the subtle things that you read between the lines when you look at the website, when you talk to people who have visited the place or rotated at the place, or if you happen to have the chance to meet people who have graduated. And then the pre-interview social kind of gives you a vibe for the place and what values are important to the residents, to the faculty, and to graduates from that place. And I think, rather than really stalk every kind of interviewer, just having general interest in what's going on at that shop was the most helpful thing for stimulating conversation. Because, I felt like when I was on the trail, interviewers wouldn't expect me to know about their most recent publication. We're not that kind of a specialty. They want to know that you have genuine questions about, that program. If you're going to a community shop that is a 3-year program and clearly is very clinically oriented and doesn't emphasize, academics or academic publications rather, quite as much as another shop, and you go there and you talk all about your research and you're asking questions really just about research, and it's going to be pretty evident that either A, you're not a good fit, or B, you just have no idea where you actually are. And so I found that, that's helpful. To be perfectly fair, once I did get the list of who I was interviewing with, if I didn't really have a clue who they were, I would certainly, quickly Google and see if they had a website from their program about them, just any kind of background at all, so I'd have some clue, oh, that's the wilderness person, or that's the research person, just so that I would know more that I could get good information from them about that aspect of the program than it was that I could kind of pander to them. I think we can all really see through that. If you're just telling me how great the things are that that I'm into already, I mean, it's pretty transparent. So that's my thought there. Rachel?
So, excuse me, I'll actually say we send out an itinerary the week before, so our applicants see who they are going to be interviewing with. I don't think that you need to, read about them and show up and already, kind of know all this stuff about, who you're interviewing with, but I do think that if you have a particular interest and you see that there's someone that shares that interest, that would be helpful to know about beforehand, so you can actually talk with ultrasound, and I'm really interested in doing ultrasound fellowship, so I really want to talk about that. And so I think it's nice to know about who you're going to be interviewing with just for some of those reasons. I will say that one time our program director tells the story about an applicant who went to like the same college as him, or med school, I think. Anyways, and had thought that there was going to be kind of a connection there, and that the applicant didn't know. It's just that would never, I think, offend me or anything. But he did mention that one time. But I think it's nice to know if you do have a connection with someone, whether it's an interest or you rotated at where they went, and so some of the same people. But definitely, I would not be stalking them. I wouldn't know every little detail about them, like Mike said, what their publications are and things like that. But I think it's always nice to know about the program that you're going to and the people you're going to interview with, just because it does show you're interested.
While we were talking, I saw a couple of good questions come up. One from Alan about Facebook and Twitter settings and what you should do with them. Set them to professional. Get them so, because I don't, I'm not big at looking up these things. I certainly know people who are. I've heard lots and lots and lots of stories. So you want to be setting them to be very professional. Nothing that you would not want a future boss to see on there, because the odds are there's somebody's going to look you up. Someone's going to Google you. So you want to set those to be very, as restrictive as you can, make them as professional as you can. The other one was how important involvement in specialty-specific professional organizations is getting into EM. My take on this is I don't think it's mandatory to be heavily involved. Almost everybody joins EMRA and ACEP and SAEM and any of the ones that are relatively inexpensive to do. I think EMRA probably, here's a shameless plug, they probably offer the most to the students in terms of not just wonderful Google Hangouts like this, but also there are lots and lots of resources in the EMRA website that they vet really heavily and really make sure that they're high quality, reliable things. So I think you get a lot out of it. In terms of involvement, certainly membership helps you keep up with what's going on and have an idea of like what's going on in the specialty you're getting into. There are probably some folks who check to see, if you've joined all those groups. It's always funny when you look at an application and you became a member in September of 2015 of ACEP, EMRA, AAEM, and SAEM, and all of a sudden you are members of them. But I don't think people get too heavily invested in it. We all sort of know that a lot of people who are going to be great at this didn't really know that EM was going to be their specialty until this summer when they got to rotate and really found out. A lot of people maybe had it narrowed down, maybe they had no idea, and we don't generally hold that against folks. It's great if you've been heavily involved and really participated and really done some things, but it's certainly not mandatory.
Just another question. What about like local, like at your schools? Like we have an emergency medicine interest group. Like how much does that or help or not help, or I don't know. Just is that any benefit there?
Rachel, what do you think?
So I think that being a member of EMIG, it is nice because it shows that you want to participate and you've joined this group. But more than just memberships, I want to see that there's something that you're involved in that you have a true interest in. And, some people don't do as many extracurricular activities, which is okay if, it looks like they've been spending more time on their academics or, they've got other things that they're involved in. Really, you're kind of looking at the whole application. If someone's really strong academically, then, it's okay. Maybe they don't have as many extracurricular activities. But if someone really is a leader and is very involved, but their academics aren't as good, then that would be someone that we would be interested in as well. We're really kind of looking at the whole picture. And the way that when we're doing our rank list, and also just selecting people to come interview, not everyone is going to be the smart one and the one that does really great on the test. We want a few people who are going to be leaders. We want a few people who are going, to participate when we have interviews and we need people to do tours and, dinners and things like that. And, we're really looking to build a team, and it needs to be a real well-rounded team. So, I think memberships are fine. But I don't put a whole lot of weight into those. If you don't have them, but you've been involved in other things, you've been doing a volunteer at a homeless shelter or a medical clinic, then that's just as good to me as being involved in something like EMIG.
Doing something, having something that you've been doing, something else you're passionate about that you can talk about is really big. I think just membership for membership's sake is doesn't really move the needle for most people, but if you see your membership and then you did something with it, and there's probably no better way to meet people, than being, participating in those organizations. You'll get interviews just out of guilt over, oh, I know Mike, I got to bring him up for an interview. But it really is a great way to meet people. I've, met some, through those organizations. It's a great way to sort of make connections and know someone beyond just, their little interview packet of information that really does not do a great job encapsulating who people are. You get that one little box where you get to put in your hobbies and interests, which is probably going to determine, that information probably has more determination for whether or not you get along with everybody who you're going to work with going forward than anything else in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think emergency medicine, more than most other specialties, I feel like that was one of the most, in my interviews, one of the most important sections of my application, because that's where most conversations stem from. Because they, we all know we're in emergency medicine because we're interested in seeing a vast diversity of pathology. We like medical and surgical. We love acute care. Like, it's all the same stuff that's in all of our personal statements. And I think the things that kind of help determine whether you fit in the culture are those personal interests and how that vibes. And I can't agree more, Adam. I do want to just add back to the social media thing and kind of the questions about checkboxes with regard to activities in school. I think a lot of us are accustomed to thinking about ourselves as students when we're kind of entering this process of residency, and thinking about school as a series of checkboxes, because that's largely what's gotten us into med school. It's that MCAT of blank and that GPA of blank, and were you part of the pre-med club, and so on and so forth. And I think going forward, it's a lot of just starting to develop your kind of professional persona, your professional self, and that really is yourself. Because it's not just your program directors and your future chiefs of departments that are going to be looking you up. Your patients are going to start looking you up. I know that my colleagues and I have gotten more than one friend request from somebody. You say, who on earth is, oh my God, that's someone that I saw in the ED last night. And that we've all had that, and it's, you really got to understand that from this point forward, you're Dr. Phil, whatever your last name is, and starting to kind of establish that and recognize that people are going to start Googling you. And it's not just people who are going to hire and fire you kind of directly, but it's the people who are really trusting in you and expecting a lot of you.
There was just another great question from Alan about interviewing early versus interviewing late in the season. You can argue it in two different directions. One way is that, in the beginning of the season, everyone who's getting those interview offers at the beginning of October probably signs up for the earlier dates in November. And so November is going to be jam-packed with, people who were in that sort of that AOA top 10% of the applicant group, kind of coming through for interview. And you can be maybe lost among that, or everyone sort of starts out really excited, and then maybe that's a really good time to interview, or maybe that's not a great time to interview because you feel like you're getting lost in the shuffle a little bit. Or you can argue that January is a better time when things have thinned out a little bit, but also people are also tired from the interview process. So you may not be as tired, but you may be more tired, but you also may be a little bit sharper and have sort of practiced your answers to Mike's questions, the same things over and over again about acute care and all the things you like. So you may be a little bit better at interviewing. There's probably some tipping point right around 8 interviews or so when you're really good at it, but you haven't started to sound like a robot yet when you hit 12 interviews. That's the real magic number for 12, is that your answers all sound the same after that. I think in our program, at least, I think most programs are like this. Interviews count the same at the beginning of the season as they do at the end. Most people who you're interviewing with have done this for many years and are pretty good at balancing out and making the same assessments early on as they do later on. We stretch the interviews out. We don't interview every day intentionally so that you don't get too fatigued with the whole process and start to get start to shut down. I think they count the same. We get interviews, we get applicants who end up coming in from the beginning of the process, from the very last day sometimes. So there's I don't think there's a huge advantage. I think it much more comes down to what works for your schedule, what gets you, what's the best combination for travel for you, what's the best combination for the time that you have off. If you have the luxury of being able to interview in November, December, and January, I plan around travel, not around trying to hit certain places. Maybe don't do your sort of like your pre-rank #1 as your very first interview. Give yourself a couple of practice swings at places that aren't necessarily at the very top of your list. But really the interview day is a lot about fit. It's a lot about sort of screening out personality disorder. They already decided you were academically good enough just by your application. You made it that far. They want you. They want to like you because they brought you in for the interview. That's a precious resource they don't want to waste. And so they really just want to make sure they think that you're going to do well and thrive there. And so, if you just show up and kind of be yourself and be interested and ask good questions and really be a consumer and assess whether this is a good place for you and figure out, not have the priorities being trying to impress them, and really have the priority being trying to learn as much as you can so you can make an informed decision about them. It usually works out pretty well.
Yeah, that's so true. I know that I found, my interview season spread really pretty long. I started probably middle of October, and my last was not until the end of January. It wasn't all kind of evenly spaced. There were certainly, boluses and pauses, but places that I went to early with the intent of I'm not really sure that I know that I'm going to rank that place super high. Some of them ended up really being very high on my list, and kind of vice versa. And to Adam's point about answers becoming too rehearsed, I think there's a certain point and it kind of depends on how you are as an interviewee, because we all kind of know how we are with chatting with strangers about things we enjoy, and some of us are more and less comfortable with that. I found that after about that magic number of 8 that Adam's talking about, I really stopped using rehearsed answers and just started moving on to, brutally honest, like what is it really like at this place, and this is a really important thing for me when I'm looking at a place that I'm going to live and work for the next few years. What can you say with regard to that particular question or concern? And kind of moving beyond, because we all have those standard answers that are all going to be the same. So, yeah. Rachel, I don't know if you have any thoughts about how you guys distribute your interviews and weight your interviews throughout the year.
Like Adam said, I think that there's lots of arguments for, which is better, and what the right answer is, I don't know, because I think that it just, there's advantages and disadvantages to early and to late. And we have also, when we look at our match list, people who have interviewed at the very beginning and people who have interviewed at the very end. We pick people up all through the season. So I wouldn't put, too much weight into, trying to do them early versus late, because which one is better? Like Adam said, I would just, what's best for your schedule and when you can fit it in.
Yeah, there's a study from a few years ago that shows that it doesn't really create much difference, even if it, in terms of whether people rank or match with a highly ranked program or not. So there's that data, but I know that doesn't ever trump the actual experience of showing up for your first interview and being terrified. And I feel like, when you meet that student who's on their first interview and they're really anxious, that, and we get that sense, and you kind of, you give them that credit, and you don't hold it against them, because we've all been through that process, and conversely, at the end of the season, we know that there's a little bit of enthusiasm that is taking a little more effort to conjure up than there was perhaps earlier on in the year.
Well said. Yeah, you guys have had some great questions, especially around the starting to plan ahead for the interview piece of this, because whether it's a lot in November or it's a lot in January, the odds are that most people end up getting to do a bunch of interviews if they sort of keep their schedule flexible and stay in touch with the programs that are most important to them. Usually can get a chance to go and interview at enough places to make some good impressions. And thinking about those things and not overthinking it too much is probably is a good way to do it.
So we have a lot of people who are in maybe not MS4s but MS3s and 2s who will be watching this or are watching this right now. And especially for those who come from schools that don't have EM programs at their school and maybe don't have that mentorship available to them right there and then. Do you have any resources that they could go to help them plan in the years ahead as they're planning for interviews and things like that?
I think that's probably an overwhelming question for a lot of people who are sort of, a couple of years. They're probably really thankful that they have a year or two before they have to go through this whole process. The biggest, most important thing is to get things done early. If you hear sort of advice that, oh, you should have that ready, have all those application materials ready in August, have your personal statement done, take your step scores earlier, really study for that. If you hear that kind of advice, That's really good advice. You know, kind of control everything. So much of this is out of your control. Control as many things as you can. The biggest thing I would say that for people sort of not yet at their late third year, early fourth year rotations, the most important thing you can do for your application is to do really well in your EM rotations. You know, plan them for times when you can go in and be at your best. You know, be prepared for them. You get some kind of focused reading book, like a first aid for EM, something where you can kind of really quickly cram in a whole bunch of that basic knowledge that people are going to expect a student to have relatively early, or be really impressed that they have relatively early. Sort of get that kind of information. That way you can really go in and kind of hit the ground running on your first EM rotation, because that impression you make and sort of what people think of you in those rotations probably makes the biggest difference in your whole application, really. Like that experience is really important. Sort of making sure that you're ready for it as much as you possibly can be is probably the most important thing you can do. There's other stuff, like doing research and getting involved early so you can participate in EMRA. And there's lots of good things. Pick something you want to do. Don't do just something just because you've been told you have to do it. Find something that you can do to kind of enrich your experience that you want to do. That's really going to be something you're going to carry forward and want to do in the future too. What do you think, Rachel? Any additional early applicant stuff?
Yeah, I've started meeting with the third years this last month, and I mean, that's what we were talking about is, when you do your rotation, you need to be, it needs to be your A game. You need to bring it. And the best thing to do is to prepare. Read, a review book, or the CDM website has a lot of resources. They have a clerkship primer, so I give, my students that website. And, I tell them if they want to come hang out with me in the ER and just spend some time there, really try to, learn how we think, and just get comfortable being in the emergency department. Some people have had, past jobs as scribes or techs and things like that, and you can always tell that they're very comfortable in that environment. Not everyone has done that, so I, always invite the students to come hang out with me and just, spend time there. Just whatever you can do to prepare for your rotation so that, you really, do a good job. You have the emergency medicine knowledge and, the people skills, and that you do well. I think really that's the best thing, because to do well in your rotation will outweigh any board score. I won't say any board score, but will outweigh board scores and grades and things like that. If you have a SLO that says this person is great, we want them, you'll want them too. And that's the best thing you can have.
Yeah, you can. There's no part of your application is more important than those performances. And it doesn't have to be perfect, that you were great from the very beginning and just a natural fit and seemed like a third-year resident on day one in the ED. And the thing we're really looking for is because no one does that, or almost nobody does that. Maybe Mike, but nobody else. What we're looking for is teachability, that people can learn. We're looking for improvement, because you're gonna, even if you don't struggle as a medical student, even if that came easy to you, at some point during residency, you're gonna struggle at some level of responsibility as we just pile more and more stuff on you, add trauma responsibilities, add airway responsibilities. As we give you more to do, you're gonna be challenged at some point, and how you respond to that is, going to be really important. And so if we see things in your performance where you improved, you got feedback, you showed you were teachable, you learned from the start to the finish, like, that's great. I love seeing letters like that, and care much less about sort of the absolute grade that's attached to it. People get really anxious about the SLOs because it's this letter of evaluation as opposed to the usual kind of, glowing letter that you get if you ask anybody outside of EM for it. But because it has that extra meaning, like, it's not just an evaluation, it's really a projection. They're saying, the most important piece of it isn't, this is how they did, it's this is how they did in this one little tiny little sample we had, but here's what we see they're going to do. And, we see that, if they do this and this, that they're going to be able to excel, and they're going to be able to do this. If they make these changes, or if they just keep working hard and keep doing what they're doing, then they're going to do great. And that projection is a really important piece of it. There was a question that came up while we were talking about this about panel interviews, the terrifying panel interview. I don't think there's a lot of places that still do them, but I'm sure there's still a few. I don't know if I have any great advice for a panel interview. I don't know if it's you just need to pick on the biggest person in the room and give it back to them. It sounds really scary. I don't ever want to have to do a panel interview. It sounds like an inquisition. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Rachel or Mike, did you guys ever get panel interviewed, or do you know a good panel interview strategy? Other than just try not to be the sweatiest person in the room?
I have no experience with that. I have not been on either side of that.
Unfortunately, I have no experience with that either. And I mean, I think ultimately, if you are yourself in any of these interview situations and your best professional self, you're going to do fine, and you're gonna present the person that that programs are going to expect to come when you show up that next summer. You know, if you're acting like someone else, it's not going to be to anyone's benefit, because either it's going to be transparent and we're going to say that person is probably pathological, like Adam was saying. That's a lot of the process, or you know, you're going to be presenting a match to some place that you're really not suitable to match to. And you know, there's plenty of programs out there, and a large, you know, majority of people who are applying in emergency medicine are going to match. It's largely about kind of figuring out where you fit and figuring out, you know, where you're going to succeed the best. At the same time, the programs are interested in trying to sort out, you know, which applicants are going to contribute the most to what their mission is, and that, like Rachel was saying, you know, programs are not seeking a homogenous crew of people who are all the same, and which was kind of a redundant statement, but not a homogenous, you know, group of interns, but different. We acknowledge, and you acknowledge when you talk with your friends and your colleagues that everyone brings something different to the table, and it's kind of about finding that right mix and that person who's going to succeed there, even if they, you know, we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, so just kind of acknowledging that along the way. And that, you know, in that panel interview, same way, be yourself. If you're a person who loves to find out what's going on with the people next to you, then do so. If you're not, don't pretend that you're excited about triathlons when the guy next to you is talking about it.
Yeah, it's just another strategy to make you nervous and see how you respond under pressure. I don't think it's done very often, but it's possible you'll find yourself in one, and it'll probably be okay, as long as you don't go running out of the room screaming.
So it looks like another question there. Yeah, looks like Adam, you're seeing it as well.
I just finally figured out how to put it up on the board for more than 2 seconds. So if any negatives, like board scores, bad eval, skipped year, etc., all those red flag things, if they don't come up during the interview, should we elect them or just leave it alone? That's a great question. I'll throw out my opinion on this is if they don't bring it up, like when people are getting ready, you know, there's a level of review of your application that is the review to decide whether to offer you an interview. It's a whole nother level of depth that most people apply to it when they're preparing to meet you. Now, some people will interview you and they will have not read anything about you, and they'll just want to meet you and meet your personality, and they won't have done anything. But the most people will have read to varying degrees, and a lot of people will have read everything that you wrote, everything you put in that application. They'll have read it, and they'll be ready to ask you about those red flags. Somebody may be assigned to ask you about those concerns in there. If you addressed it somewhere, like in your personal statement, which is sort of where everybody recommends, it's where if I find something, that's where I go looking. Is I go looking in the personal statement for, you know, let's explain why there's, you know, 3 years missing in the middle of med school. I go looking in the personal statement. If I'm happy with the explanation, I'm not going to bring it up, and that doesn't mean you need to go ahead and bring it up, and you know, you don't want to necessarily get defensive. But if there's something I genuinely want an explanation for, I didn't think was adequately explained, you know, I'm going to bring it up. But I don't think you should feel like you need to sort of try and get out in front of it. Someone's going to bring it to you if they think it matters. and you don't want to bring up something that turns out that they have no concerns over but was worrying for you. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that, it should have been addressed at some point, during your application, and the PD, the APD, whoever's reviewing those applications has seen that, and they invited you anyways. If there are still unanswered questions, we can figure out some way to kind of bring it up and see how you react. Tell me about a challenge you faced, or that sort of thing. But for the most part, we've read your explanation in your application, and hopefully it's been addressed well enough. If we've invited you, then we should have been happy with what's there. And there will be some people, maybe just faculty members, or we'll have our chief residents interview sometimes, and they may not have looked at the application as closely, and so there's no reason to tell them about it and bias their opinion in any way. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, great. Really
questions we missed. I think we got just about all the questions that were typed in. Sorry, I didn't see those before now. I think we should probably wrap up pretty soon, but if there's any sort of final questions that folks have, sort of burning issues, I think we covered a lot of really important things for the application, sort of, which is kind of that horse is out of the barn. But it's it's now this waiting game time, as well as kind of getting ready for interviews, because it's really all one piece, sort of planning for this next step. Any other questions that folks have? All right, well, I'm going to thank you all for kind of bearing with the technological problems. I'm happy that it ended up being, at least as much of a conversation as we were able to get out of it. I think that, I think you guys brought up some wonderful things and asked some really, really good questions. I want to wish all of you luck in this whole process. I guess the last thing, sort of my closing thought, and I'll see if Rachel has anything else, is try not to take rejections in this personally, or try not to take the lack of an interview offer. You'll know people who you feel like you maybe are a better applicant than they are, or the same, or can't see what the difference is, and they get an interview somewhere and someone else doesn't. There is a lot of subjectivity in this. Every program is looking for different things. Every interviewer or every reviewer, everybody looking at applications has their own things. Some people are really into personal statements, other people are really into board scores, some people are really into letters. Everybody has it. Some people are really just into service or membership in a certain organization or research, and that's going to inform who they're going to invite. And so sometimes the difference in an interview offer that you get and somebody else gets is just who actually screened your application and sort of put their spin on it when they rated it. So try not to worry so much. It's really not a reflection on you, because it's just it's a very unscientific process done by some relatively scientific people that in the end tends to shake out. When sort of given time, you'll end up getting to interview, for the most part, you guys are going to get to interview at enough places to try out, kind of get to see different places, find some places you fit, and most people end up in the end pretty happy in the process. Especially if you're taking time to be on a Google Hangout at 10:30 at night on a random Wednesday in October. Rachel, do you have anything you want to sort of add before we go, or Mike?
I guess my thought would be enjoy yourself during this time. You're going around looking at programs, that you're going to spend the next several years, and really get to know, what the program is about. Really look at if the residents are happy, and do you think that you'll be a fit. I mean, most programs, really all the programs that are accredited, you're going to get a good education. You're going to be a good emergency medicine physician. So, just see, you know, what else do they offer, and would you be happy there? Would it be a good fit for you? I think that, you know, that's what's really important when you're going on the interview trail and going to these different places. So don't freak out, relax, have a good time, and enjoy this. This is a really exciting time in your career.
Yeah, those are great thoughts, and on behalf of Emma, I really want to thank Adam Kellogg, Associate Program Director from Baystate, and Rachael Freeze-Ramsey, Associate Program Director from University of Arkansas, for your great insights, and again, thank you everybody for your patience with the technological issues here. We're looking forward to a lot more opportunities like this for students to interact with faculty and really have a robust kind of exchange of thoughts and questions that, obviously none of you live near either of our faculty mentors, and it's really terrific to have the opportunity to get some face time with them and kind of hear their thoughts from a different perspective than we might have had before. So can't thank all of you enough for your participation and your patience, and look forward to much more, and good luck to all of you applicants.
Thank you for your great questions, and Mike, thank you for your contributions too. I think it's great having a resident who's been through this recently sort of add their viewpoint and sort of the more legitimate experience than Rachel and I, who was years and years ago that we went through this. It's all forgotten, except for the panel interviews, especially the panel interviews.
Yeah, I interviewed at 3 places. It's very different now.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. I just wanted to say it's good to see like the input from, I guess we have faculty advisors at my school, but input from other schools and what they find important. So it allows us to kind of have a better feel for like what everybody's looking for, and it's just very helpful. So thank y'all again.
With some consistency.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. If you miss any kind of portions of this, it's available streaming on YouTube as soon as I hit stop broadcast here. So have with your friends, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody.